From WWE's show dedicated to the much-loved concept, bringing with it a ton of real-life disputes, to those more shocking moments to have actually played out on the double-ringed battlefield. These are just a number of controversial WarGames occurrences to keep in mind before the intimidating cage makes its welcome return to TV screens later this year. I'm Gareth from What Culture Wrestling, and here are the 10 most infamous WarGames wrestling controversies. Number 10. That time WWE previously got WarGames cold feet. Though this year will represent the first time WWE have officially welcomed the WarGames structure onto main roster programming, there was actually a moment in time almost a decade earlier when it looked as though Dusty Rhodes' brainchild was on the cusp of making its debut at Battleground 2013. As recalled by the American Dream's own son though, former WWE chairman Vince McMahon and the company as a whole decided to back out of unleashing the grand cage of chaos on their audience at the last minute, much to the disappointment of Cody Rhodes in particular. Speaking to Ring Rust Radio, the American Nightmare would note how his battle alongside brother Dustin in his Goldust guise against The Shield was originally planned to go down within their father's iconic concept. Yet the excuse of it takes up too much ticket space soon proved too awkward an obstacle to overcome for some, and the bout was swiftly changed up to a tag encounter instead. How disappointing. Number 9. Sid purposely tried to injure Brian Pillman. Now there's accidentally picking up a gnarly gash, broken bone, or torn muscle in this formidable WarGames environment, and then there's one of your colleagues actually going out of their way to brutally inflict some legit damage under the steel roof. That's precisely the scenario Brian Pillman found himself in when battling it out with Sid Vicious, as Flying Brian, Sting, and the Steiners collided with the Four Horsemen and Larry Zbyszko inside WarGames at Wrestle War 91. At one point late in the brutal war between the teams, Sid could be found dumping Pillman right onto his neck during the execution of his powerbomb finisher. Far from this being an unexpected botch though, Justice would later reveal that this was done entirely on purpose, with the intention of injuring a star he'd not exactly been getting along with in real life. As he put it, when we were in Phoenix for WarGames, he was running his mouth back there, so I drove him as hard as I could into the cage and as hard as I could into the mat to send him to the hospital. And it still makes for a pretty disturbing watch some 3 decades on. Number 8. Vader was swapped out of the games due to a backstage fight. Said real-life throwdown involved a Mastodon brawling with Paul Orndorff in the locker room around this time, and it wasn't too long before the company decided to completely drop Vader's attachment to the incoming WarGames epic and part ways with the legendary big man in the process. In Vader's place, Lex Luger was eventually recruited by the Hulkster for the battle with the aforementioned DOD. With the monstrous stars previously scheduled WCW World Championship showdown with Hogan in the early days of Monday Nitro also being handed over to Luger too. Number 7. Brit Baker didn't know she was accidentally caught on camera. Turning to NXT's take on all things WarGames now, with WWE's latest rival in AEW very much up and running around the time of their then latest takeover WarGames extravaganza, the sight of one of Tony Khan's stars in Brit Baker being captured on camera during the multi-person steel cage finale was enough to leave many wondering whether Triple H was trying to stir up some drama within the land of All Elite. As it goes, the former AEW Women's World Champion would later reveal that she wasn't actually aware of the fact she'd been shown in a state of shock during the aftermath of her boyfriend's hellacious match-finishing bump from atop the structure, telling Talk Is Jericho that Triple H immediately apologized for the cutaway backstage. And though Baker wasn't exactly fully convinced WWE's head of production didn't know who she was before jumping to a shot of her stunned expression, this initially controversial happening worked out for the best in the end, with the Doctor becoming the top Google search coming out of AEW's biggest rival's show. Ha, fancy that. Number 6. Blood and Guts. Hot on the heels of the former WWE chairman claiming his company wasn't gonna do blood and guts and things of that nature, TK announced that not only was his promotion about to let loose their own brand of WarGames-inspired savagery, one that was much more faithful to the OG structure that WWE owns the name rights to, but that he would also be going by the name of, you guessed it, Blood and Guts. And if all that wasn't enough of a WarGames dig at the competition, the fact one-time NXT general manager and WarGames screamer William Regal was on hand to utter the all-elite version of this legendary battle cry earlier this year again proves that this particular section of the current wrestling war is far from over. Number 5. Triple H doesn't want a bloody games anymore. Despite not exactly being shy about shedding some color himself within a steel cage over the years, the game would note to the ringer recently when talking about the incoming WWE WWE iteration of the Team Wars, that the world has evolved and I don't think it's necessary in regards to intentionally bleeding in this type of environment. The fact said comments come not too long after AEW's most recent homage to the bloody WarGames battles of the past, with the Jericho Appreciation Society's violent fight with the Blackpool Combat Club going down in late June, was likely anything but a coincidence. The King of Kings comments of the practice of excessive blading being irresponsible not only confirms the days of WWE WarGames bloodshed won't be on the horizon anytime soon, but act as yet another subtle dig at TK's increasingly bloody world. Number 4. Vince McMahon's hate for all things WarGames. The fact AEW President Tony Khan opted to brand his variety of WarGames as blood and guts actually turned out to be the gift that kept on giving, along with being a direct callback to Vince McMahon's condemning of all elite bloody violence. The fact the title was used as the new moniker for a match type the former chairman of the board utterly detested was likely the icing on top of the cake for TK and the gang. No doubt also playing into WWE's decision to back out of debuting the structure back at Battleground 2013, as we've already mentioned. McMahon was said to have turned down the chance to bring WarGames into his world around the time of the Elimination Chamber's debut in 2002, due to, among other elements, not being a fan of the double ring thing, as Bruce Pritchard put it. And as AEW superstar Chris Jericho would also confess on Talk Is Jericho, Elimination Chamber was originally going to be WarGames, but Vince didn't want to do WarGames because he said it was too WCW. So then we created our own. Hunter always wanted to do WarGames and then he brings it to NXT. So with that in mind, it's highly unlikely this particular brand of iconic stipulation bout would have ever made its way onto the main roster had a WarGames hating McMahon still been firmly planted in the gorilla position. Number 3. Corey Graves calls out Maro Ronaldo's commentary. Not long after Graves' pointed comments of "just for the record guys, I know you wouldn't know it, but there's actually a WWE Hall of Famer and a former Ring of Honor champion on commentary. I'd imagine they have a lot to offer," Ronaldo would proceed to delete his Twitter account. Michael Cole would then attempt to paper over his absence the following night by stating he was missing due to blowing out his voice. And while Graves would at least apologize for his ill-advised attempts at stirring up a little controversy a few days on, the fact the former NXT commentator took to calling out his own colleague online in the first place, a co-worker who has also publicly shared his ongoing struggles with bipolar disorder, showcased a severe and frankly idiotic lack of professionalism on Graves' part. Number 2. Those times the formula has been messed with. As with any stipulation that has been hovering around the wrestling landscape for an age, folks taking the tried and tested WarGames environment and attempting to change up and evolve the structure/rules of the brutal bout over the years was to be expected, wasn't it? And sure enough, by 1998, WCW had already introduced another team to the mix, with Fall Brawl 98 seeing Team WCW battle against NWO Hollywood and NWO Wolfpack. Following that, WarGames was strutted out onto WCW Nitro in September 2000, with the OG structure swapped out for the absurd 3-tiered cage first seen in the WCW-produced Ready to Rumble movie and at the Slamboree event earlier that year. Needless to say, Russo's revenge did not go down too well with fans in the slightest, but more on that later. Fast forward to 2017 and WWE set about unveiling their own iteration of the WarGames battleground, this time controversially ridding the structure of its trademark roof. In the end though, said ruthless delight eventually paved the way for many a jaw-dropping off-the-cage bump on multiple takeovers. Evolution isn't always grown in juicing, eh? Number 1. Russo's Revenge. Without question taking the title of worst ever WarGames entry to trickle onto mainstream television, the aforementioned triple-tier cage layout seen on the September 4th, 2000 edition of Nitro required the folks involved to climb to the top cage, retrieve the WCW World Championship, and then wiggle back down through the cages whilst avoiding being hijacked by a fellow competitor. You keeping up? If that wasn't enough insanity for you, Russo himself was involved in the highly controversial action, and just for good measure, he eventually pulled off yet another trademark swerve bro by handing a betrayal-teasing Nash his title on the way out of the chaotic encounter. Thankfully, Russo didn't come away with the belt himself on the night. That would come a bit later on in the month, of course. But this entire debacle of an overstuffed WarGames 2000 car crash all but killed off the stipulation for nearly 2 decades on mainstream television. So cheers for that, bro, and here's to Survivor Series 2022, eh? And that's our list of any other infamous WarGames wrestling controversies that we've missed. Let us know all about them in the comments section right down below, and do not forget to like, share, and click on that subscribe button while you're at it. Also, if you like this kind of thing, then head on over to whatculture.com and find some more incredible articles just like the one this video you're watching right now is based on. I've been Gareth from What Culture Wrestling. Thank you as always for clicking on this lovely video today. Hopefully I'll see your faces very, very soon, but in the meantime, be good to yourself. Bye-bye.